A group of researchers once took muscle samples from the thighs of two groups of sedentary young men, men who were matched perfectly in age, height, and weight. They were not athletes. They had not been training. The only difference between the two groups was where their ancestors came from. One group was of West African descent, the other was white Canadian. And when the scientists looked at those samples under a microscope, they found something that nobody in that lab had been prepared for. The gap between the two groups was not small. It was enormous. And it raised a question that science has been quietly trying to answer ever since. Is there something encoded in the genetics of Black Americans? Something forged over tens of thousands of years of African evolution, and then further shaped by one of the most brutal selection events in human history that gives them a measurable physical edge over every other population on Earth? Before we dive in, comment where you are watching from and click subscribe. Let's start with the basics, because to understand what the science actually says, you need to understand the machinery it's describing. Inside every muscle in your body, there are two fundamentally different types of fibers. Type 1 fibers, slow twitch, are built for endurance. They are dense with mitochondria, efficient with oxygen, and resistant to fatigue. Type 2 fibers, fast twitch, are built for power. They generate massive force in a short burst, firing at 200 to 250% the speed of slow twitch fibers. Think of it this way. Slow twitch fibers are like a diesel engine, efficient, steady, built for the long haul. Fast twitch fibers are like a nitrous boost, explosive, dominant, and gone in seconds. Most humans average roughly 50% of each type, but that average hides a staggering amount of variation. And that variation, according to a growing body of peer-reviewed science, does not appear to be random across populations. In 1986, scientists at Laval University in Quebec published a study in the Journal of Applied Physiology that would quietly reverberate through sports science for decades. They took muscle biopsies from the thighs of two groups of sedentary students. One group was primarily from West African countries. The other was white Canadian. Same age, same height, same weight. No training history that would have skewed the results. What they found was striking. The West African students had, on average, 67.5% fast twitch muscle fibers. The white Canadian students averaged 59%. That's a gap of more than 8 percentage points, measured in people who had never trained for anything, who hadn't spent years in a gym sculpting their fiber composition. This wasn't an athletic advantage forged in a weight room. This appeared to be something these individuals were born with. And the differences didn't stop at fiber type. The same study found that the enzymes driving anaerobic metabolism, the energy pathway that powers explosive, high-force muscular contractions, were significantly more active in the West African students. Phosphofructokinase, creatine kinase, lactate dehydrogenase, all running hotter and faster in the African subjects. The machinery wasn't just different in composition, it was different in performance. Now here's where the science gets even more interesting, because fiber type is only one piece of this puzzle. The other piece lives inside a single gene. It's called ACTN3, the speed gene. The ACTN3 gene produces a protein called alpha-actinin 3, found almost exclusively in fast-twitch type 2 muscle fibers. This protein helps those fibers generate force quickly. There is a specific variant known as the R577X polymorphism that matters enormously here. Some people carry the R version, allowing their muscles to produce alpha-actinin 3 normally. Others carry the X version, which shuts down production of the protein entirely. Here's the critical part. According to data published in Human Molecular Genetics, the frequency of the non-functional X allele, the version that turns off alpha-actinin 3 production, is dramatically different across populations. In Asians, the X allele frequency sits at around 52%. In white Europeans, it is approximately 42%. In African Americans, it drops to just 27%. And in sub-Saharan Africans, it falls all the way to 16%. What that means is this: Black Americans are significantly more likely to carry the version of the ACTN3 gene that keeps fast twitch muscle fiber fully functional and performing at maximum capacity. And Africans from the continent are even more so. This is not a marginal genetic difference. This is a difference that, in elite athletic populations, has been shown to matter enormously. Studies of elite sprinters, including a multi-cohort study of 346 professional sprinters from 10 countries, found that not a single elite sprinter carried the non-functional XX genotype. 0. The athletes who ran the fastest in the world were almost exclusively carriers of the R allele, the same allele that Black Americans carry at dramatically higher rates than any other population on Earth. But we're not done, because layered on top of the muscle fiber story and the ACTN3 story is something that many researchers consider the most striking physical difference between Black Americans and every other racial group: bone density. Multiple peer-reviewed studies published in journals including the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, the Journal of Applied Physiology and Bone have reached the same conclusion. Black Americans have measurably greater bone mineral density than white Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Asian Americans at virtually every skeletal site measured. A cohort study of 402 men and women conducted at Kaiser Permanente in Northern California found that bone density was statistically significantly greater in Black subjects than in white subjects at every single skeletal site examined. And critically, this difference remains significant even after researchers adjusted for every confounding variable they could identify: age, body weight, height, physical activity level, diet, calcium intake, hormone levels. The gap did not disappear with adjustments. It persisted. A 2017 study published in the journal Bone confirmed and extended these findings, showing that young adults of Black and African American descent had not only greater bone density, but more favorable bone microarchitecture, the internal lattice structure that gives bone its load-bearing strength, and significantly higher estimated bone failure loads than their white counterparts. These differences were present in both men and women and were established by early adulthood. What does denser, stronger bone mean for physical performance? Think of it this way. A skeleton is a system of levers. Stronger bones can bear greater muscular force without buckling. They are the platform from which all explosive power is generated. If the fast twitch fiber is the engine, bone is the chassis that force has to pass through before it moves anything in the real world. A more rigid, load-bearing chassis does not just protect against injury, it enables greater force transfer with every single muscular contraction. And Black Americans, on average, carry a significantly more robust chassis than any other population group that has been studied. That advantage sits beneath every movement. It does not show up on a highlight reel, but it is there in the biology, quietly doing its work. Now let's talk about something that generates a lot of controversy and deserves to be addressed with precision, not avoidance: testosterone and its relationship to muscular strength. There is a meta-analysis published by Johns Hopkins University reviewing 15 peer-reviewed studies that found after age adjustment, free testosterone levels were statistically significantly higher in Black men than in white men by approximately 2.5% to 4.9%. A separate cross-sectional analysis of 1,637 males drawn from the 3rd National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey found that Black men between the ages of 20 to 69 averaged approximately 0.39 nanograms per milliliter more testosterone than white and Hispanic men. And testosterone, as virtually every exercise scientist will tell you, is one of the primary drivers of muscle protein synthesis, the process by which muscle fibers grow larger and stronger in response to mechanical stress. These differences are modest. They do not mean every Black man has higher testosterone than every white man, but at the population level, there is a small, statistically consistent, biologically real difference. And stacked on top of fiber type, ACTN3, and bone density, it contributes to a cumulative physiological profile that appears unique in the breadth of human research. Before we go any further, if this channel is giving you information you are not finding anywhere else, Take 2 seconds and hit subscribe. We cover the science that most channels are afraid to touch, and we do it without spinning the results in either direction. Now back to the biology, because here's where the story gets genuinely remarkable. These physiological advantages did not appear out of nowhere. They are the product of two separate forces operating across an enormous span of time. The first is West African evolutionary history. The second is one of the most horrific events in human history, the transatlantic slave trade. Modern humans originated in Africa, the crucible of human evolution for hundreds of thousands of years. West Africa specifically, the region from which the vast majority of enslaved Africans were taken, produced populations carrying an exceptionally high proportion of fast-twitch muscle fiber, powerful anaerobic metabolic pathways, and denser skeletal structures. Some researchers, including science writer David Epstein, have pointed to malaria as a potential driver. The hypothesis holds that under intense malarial pressure, populations shifted toward more anaerobic, fast-twitch dominant muscle physiology because individuals less reliant on oxygen for energy had a survival edge against a disease that destroys the blood's oxygen-carrying capacity. Whether this mechanism fully explains the data remains debated, but the data itself is not. It was measured in sedentary individuals with no training advantage. It was in their biology from birth. Now here is the second force, the one that makes Black Americans specifically distinct from Africans on the continent. The transatlantic slave trade was a catastrophic selection event. Between the 1500s and the 1800s, an estimated 12 million Africans were captured and transported to the Americas. The Middle Passage was brutally lethal, and by conservative estimates, between 10 and 20% of captives died during the crossing alone, following forced marches of hundreds of miles to reach the coast. After arrival, enslaved people endured decades of plantation labor of extraordinary physical intensity. A hypothesis published in the journal Medical Hypotheses proposes that this constituted an involuntary genetic selection event. The individuals who survived and reproduced were disproportionately those whose biology made survival possible: greater muscular strength, denser bones, and more efficient metabolism under caloric deprivation. A related paper in a peer-reviewed medical journal noted that the 10 fastest men and 9 fastest women in recorded history are all descendants of West African slaves who survived the Middle Passage, and proposed that enhanced androgen receptor responsiveness, selected for under those extreme physiological demands, may be part of the biological explanation. This hypothesis is contested. Some population geneticists argue the mortality events may not have been genetically targeted in the precise way the model requires. But what is not contested is that Black Americans descend predominantly from West Africans, and they carry, at higher rates than virtually any other population, the genetic signatures associated with explosive muscular performance. Whether those signatures were amplified by the slave trade or are primarily a product of ancient West African evolution, they are present in measurable, documented, peer-reviewed quantities. Let's now do exactly what the title of this video promised. How do Black Americans stack up against every other major population group when the data is laid side by side? Against East Africans, represented by Kenyan and Ethiopian runners, the picture is fascinating. East Africans also carry the functional ACTN3R allele at very high rates, and they dominate long-distance running in a way that is as statistically extraordinary as West African dominance in sprinting, but their optimization runs in a different direction. East African physiology is built for aerobic supremacy, extraordinary VO2 max, lightweight limb structures, and exceptional slow twitch efficiency. West African and Black American physiology is built for force and explosion. Both represent extreme genetic adaptation, just in opposite directions. Against white Europeans and white Americans, the data is clear. White populations carry the non-functional ACTN3X allele at 42% versus 27% in Black Americans. They also have lower bone mineral density, a higher proportion of slow twitch type 1 muscle fibers, and by a small but consistent margin, lower free testosterone. In terms of the genetics of raw explosive muscular power, the average white American carries a measurably less favorable profile. That is what the peer-reviewed data says, not opinion, not commentary, measured biological values. Against East Asians, the gap is wider still. East Asian populations carry the highest frequency of the non-functional ACTN3X allele of any major group, approximately 52%. They also tend to have lower baseline bone mineral density. A 2025 analysis in the Journal of Integrated Social Sciences and Humanities found that power-oriented fiber composition and appendicular muscle mass favor individuals of African descent over East Asian populations. East Asian athletic excellence in strength and power sports tends to be the product of extraordinary training culture, not a comparable genetic baseline in explosive muscular capacity. Against Hispanic and Latino populations, the picture is heterogeneous. This is a genetically diverse group drawing from indigenous American, West African, and European ancestry in varying proportions. Where greater African ancestry is present, the physiological markers track accordingly. So what do we actually know? Black Americans carry, at higher average frequencies than any other measured population, a cluster of genetic and physiological traits specifically associated with explosive muscular power, including higher fast twitch fiber proportion, higher anaerobic enzyme activity, higher functional ACTN3R allele frequency, greater bone mineral density, and modestly but consistently elevated free testosterone. These are not isolated findings from a single controversial lab. They appear across decades of peer-reviewed research at multiple independent institutions using different methodologies, including muscle biopsies, genetic sequencing, dual energy X-ray, absorptiometry scans, and blood hormone panels. And they are measured in sedentary individuals with no training advantage. These differences exist before a single rep is lifted, before a single sprint is run. They are encoded in the biology, not earned in a gym, but these are population averages, not individual destinies. The variation within any population vastly exceeds the average differences between populations. There are white Americans with higher fast twitch fiber proportions than most Black Americans. There are Black Americans whose fiber profiles look more endurance-oriented than explosive. Genetics is probabilistic, not deterministic. A gene is not a guarantee. It is a loading of the dice, not a fixed outcome. What the science identifies is a tendency, a statistical skew in one direction that becomes visible only when you look at the data at scale. There is one more dimension to this that may be the most important of all. The same genetic profile that confers advantages in explosive strength, the elevated proportion of fast twitch type 2 fibers, carries real metabolic trade-offs. Type 2 fibers are less oxidative than type 1 fibers. They have lower mitochondrial density, burn through glucose differently, and are less efficient at sustained aerobic work. Research published in scientific journals has proposed that the higher proportion of type 2 fibers in Black Americans, the exact same fibers responsible for their explosive power advantage, may contribute to elevated rates of type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance in this population. The biochemistry that makes you dominant on a sprint track or in a weight room becomes a liability when the environment offers unlimited calories and demands almost no physical output. The same biological trait that built the most explosive athletes in human history may, under modern sedentary conditions and calorie-dense food environments, carry health consequences that are visibly showing up in public health data right now. This is the complexity that gets lost when this conversation collapses into either pride or controversy. The human body is not a scoreboard. It is a system of trade-offs. There is no free advantage. Every optimization in one direction carries a measurable cost in another. Nature does not rank populations. It shapes them for the environments that shape them and then sends them into a world that looks nothing like those environments. What the science ultimately reveals, when you lay it all out and look at it honestly, is not a simple hierarchy. It is a portrait of human adaptation that is simultaneously humbling and extraordinary. Black Americans carry within their cells the evolutionary inheritance of the world's oldest continent, a place that forged the human body in every environment imaginable across hundreds of thousands of years. They carry the genetic signatures of populations that were optimized over deep evolutionary time for exactly the kind of explosive, powerful, anaerobic physical performance that modern sports science has spent decades trying to understand. And whether you believe the additional shaping influence came from the horror of the Middle Passage or purely from the ancient biology of West Africa, the result is the same: a population that, in the specific domain of explosive muscular power, carries a genetic profile that no other population on Earth matches at the same frequency. That is not a claim invented for a YouTube video. That is what the peer-reviewed science, published in the Journal of Applied Physiology, in Human Molecular Genetics, in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, and in journals across multiple continents, actually says. Not mythology, not talking points, measured biological values confirmed across decades of research by independent teams who had no agenda other than understanding what the data showed. The gap, as this video promised, is real, and the story behind it is more ancient, more layered, and more profound than any headline, any debate, or any highlight reel could ever fully capture. If this changed the way you think, share it with someone who needs to see it. Comment what shocked you most, and subscribe for more deep dives into human ancestry, genetics, and hidden history.